Hi everyone. I'm April Yee, and I'll introduce myself more thoroughly in just a few minutes. For those of you who were with us for Where Do I Begin or Interviewing 101, welcome back. For those who missed our previous sessions, thank you for joining us today. And if you're interested in viewing the recording of the previous sessions, they can be found on the Summer Career Series website. Staff will add the YouTube links for the past two sessions in the chat box. And this session is being recorded and will be available in a few days on the Alumni Summer Career Series website. And if you do not wish to be recorded, you can drop off now and you'll be able to find the session's recording in a few days on the series website, and we'll send you a link around the same time. So we suggest putting yourself in speaker view. And if you have a question, please use the raise hand button, or you can type it into the chat box. And we strongly encourage your participation. So please lean into the alumni guests, ask questions, and stay engaged. I'd like to share the UCSC land acknowledgement now. So the land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Awaswas speaking UP tribe. The Amamutsan tribal band, comprised of the descendants of indigenous people taken to missions Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. So we'll get into the series and today's session. The 2021 Alumni Summer Career Series consists of 6 panel discussions, and though the sessions build off each other, they can be utilized as standalone sessions. Those who attend the whole series will travel through the career process from the developing a strategy stage to the I have a job, now what stage. With each session, we hope you will find useful tips and strategies that prepare you to launch your career search or begin a new career, all the while providing you opportunities to network with and receive support from fellow banana slugs. And our session today will focus on how to remain true to your values, perspectives, and identity in your career. So we'll get started with introductions. We have here today myself, Shantae Thomas, Armando Hernandez, and Colin Diaz. And I'll introduce myself and then I'll pass it to Shantae when I'm done. So my name is April Yee. Again, I graduated from Oaks in 2002. I double majored in American Studies and Psychology, and I minored in Communication and Rhetoric. I previously worked in the private equity industry for over 10 years, being based in San Francisco and New York City. And after undergoing emergency open heart surgery in 2015, I am now a holistic life coach focusing on self-care and well-being practices for professionals. I'm also the VP of Finance for the UCSC Alumni Council, which has been a really great way for me to stay connected to UCSC and support current and future students and alumni. And I'm really happy to be here today, and I feel inspired seeing so many of you here being engaged in your education and continued learning by participating in this event. And just on the topic of today's session, I think being your authentic self at work can be challenging when you first start out due to a lack of experiencing yourself in various work-related situations. And I can tell you about all the situations I've been in where I felt awkward and self-conscious, but telling you about them won't necessarily keep you from feeling awkward and self-conscious when you find yourself in these kinds of situations. But this isn't a bad thing. When you have opportunities to explore and question what is authentic for you, you become more clear about what's important for you to share and how you want to share yourself. And I think what helps you to find your voice and authenticity includes a few things: curiosity about people and things, having a sense of what you value and what's important to you when connecting with people, and practice. So practice being in varying situations that stretch your boundaries and give you the experience of expressing yourself in different ways with different people and groups of people. And until you know what feels uncomfortable for you, you won't know how to adjust in order to feel more comfortable in those situations. And I think when you know what you value and what's important to you when connecting with people, it can create a sense of confidence and self-esteem. And practice is important. And for some reason, we can sometimes think that we should just know how to do something well without ever having done it. And I want to emphasize the role of practicing here. If someone seems like a natural doing anything, I think it's safe to say that it's because they practiced a lot. And practice comes in the form of doing it, engaging and putting yourself out there, seeing what feels right for you in different situations. And from doing, you'll get practice and become familiar with who you enjoy being with others and how you like showing up. And some questions that could potentially be helpful to consider are, what do I enjoy about myself? What's important for others to know about me? How do I want to show up for myself? And how do I want to show up for others? And so by now I've practiced a lot and I know myself better and well enough to feel comfortable showing up authentically as me, which is a connected, engaged, present person, and then making adjustments when needed. And I think what really helped me to build these skills initially was my participation in student orgs and APERC while I was at UC Santa Cruz. And there will always be opportunities for you to get clearer on what authentic means and feels like to you. So you'll always get to build what that means to you and how much more comfortable you'll feel being authentic. So I'll pass it to Shantae next.
Great, thanks so much for that, April. And so many things, I'm like, ditto, ditto, ditto. So hey, everyone. My name is Shantae Thomas. I use she, her pronouns. I currently serve as the Associate Dean of Students for the Ethic and Gender Centers at the University of California, Riverside. But prior to joining Riverside in July of 2020, I served as the director of the African American Research and Cultural Center at UC Santa Cruz for 7 years. So not only am I an alum, I definitely served kind of on the front lines for a variety of different initiatives and really looking to increase and improve and enhance the experience of our all students, but specifically my targeted constituency was Pan-African students. So, with that, I think through, the multiple facets that I've worked in education, from being a teacher to working in nonprofit to working in enrollment management for a couple of corporate industries, and now specifically working on equity and identity work within higher ed, definitely has really brought this particular concept of what does it mean to be authentic at the forefront of the way that we're moving through this work. And I can honestly say that it's taken me time to get here. I as far as being authentic at work, it's definitely how I move through my work now and have for maybe the last 10 years. But as someone who's been, working from graduating from UC Santa Cruz in 1999, it's taken me time to get here and be okay with my truth. And what does that actually mean? So thinking through kind of some of the things that April talked about as far as like, what is the value set? How am I staying grounded? How am I going to be okay with how I present myself? And we can talk about respectability politics. And that's one of the things that if you join me, we can kind of lean into that. But I think thinking through that, is it okay for you to be you? I think is a question that sometimes folks have. Is the me enough? Is it, am I going to be judged in a particular way? The answer is probably yes. And you still need to be you. But I think, again, it's taken me time to get here. I will say, in working with students for the course of, for the past 20 years or so, I think that, interestingly enough, younger generations are really coming kind of into their own and making their authentic path sooner than what I can say, the Gen Xers and some of the other folks that are around my age that I see here. Hey, some folks that I see familiar names, which I think is a great thing. But I think there's also a critical mass of folks that that aren't ready to, show up day one, upon graduating when you're 22, 23. So I really want to be able to kind of share, different ways to move through that, and maybe get to the point of you just being, not just okay, but being proud about who you are and showing up in a very authentic and honest and genuine way when you're in your workplace. I know we talk a lot about code switching. I know there's multiple opinions on what it means to code switch. So I'm happy to kind of have that conversation as well. I honestly, I don't do it anymore, but I did it for probably the first 15 years of my career, again, because recognizing that it's only acceptable to show up in a way that's more palatable for others, and that's exhausting. Let's just be perfectly honest. But it doesn't mean that you're bad if you do it. And I think, again, I try to remove some of the shame that folks put on individuals when they kind of move through work that way. So I want to also, just harken back and think to one of my sheroes, Audre Lorde. The quote essentially is, if I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunching to other people's fantasies and eating alive. And for me, that really speaks to how, again, you owe it to yourself to be you. And, you're going to set the tone. You really should work through bringing your whole self into an environment that you're in, not just in your workplace, but in general. It's really difficult to put on multiple masks. The irony, now we're saying that in a pandemic. But again, I recognize it's also a safety guard, a safety precaution for a lot of folks. So I want to name that I know it's not always safe for folks to show up as their authentic self. And I think that's important too. And we obviously want to create brave spaces for everyone. And that's just not a reality for where folks are, within their maybe given identity set. So, in the breakout session, again, if you opt to come to me, or we can definitely have these conversations at other time, because I think, being able to navigate your authenticity and being prepared for that, a large part of that is mentorship. So if you don't currently have, a group of individuals that are considered to be like your board, then that's something that we should probably talk about, because mentorship is going to be key. We also talk about sponsorship. But I think, again, recognizing an individual that you either admire or you recognize, how they've kind of come through the work, and wanting to not be them, because again, we're talking about being yourself, but how they got to that point. Generally, to April's point, it's taken a lot of practice for individuals to kind of sit and be comfortable with where they are. So I just want to encourage all folks. It is a process for all of us to get to wherever we are now, and it did not happen overnight. And where you are right now is where you are, but we want to help, if that's something you're comfortable with, get to a point where you can essentially be you, because your best authentic self is going to be the one that people are going to really be able to, one, probably see the representation that they need to see, but also be able to continue to build the coalition and the community that's necessary for whatever environment you're in, be that if you're in the corporate world, or you're in academia, or if you're in the tech world. And again, it's not always a place that folks can be, but we as individuals can change that. And that's what I'm all about, being a change agent in the best ways possible. So with that, there's a lot that I said, and there's so much more, but I know we want to keep it relatively short, and I'll throw it over to my colleague, Armando.
All right, let me get my video going here. One quick second. All right. Hello, everybody. Very happy to be a part of today's presentation. Got a few thoughts about, what it means to be a UCSC alumni, and then also what it is about our authenticity that is at question today. I believe that unquestioned authenticity is like unquestioned faith, meaning that faith unquestioned isn't really faith. So in order to be authentic, you have to have gone through that moment of doubt. You have to grow as a person. There's a lot of self-reflection, and I was a philosophy major at UCSC, so a lot of my presentation will be about critical thinking of what it means to be authentic, and examples of things like workplace, like, what do you call it, like problem solving, troubleshooting in these regards, and having to stay authentic or genuine to oneself in the face of adversity. That's when the feet are to the fire, as it were. So I'm a disabled person of color with a visual impairment. So I will also be speaking on what it means to be a disabled person of color in the workplace. So I hope you'll join me for my breakout session, and look forward to speaking to you all soon. Is the next person up Colin?
Yes, thank you, Armando.
Yes, thank you, Armando. Great to be here with you all. Many familiar names and faces, and just first of all, I'd like to thank UCSC for putting on this series. I was able to attend one of the earlier sessions and definitely will be checking back in, and so I'll be very, very brief in this intro portion because I'm going to share a little bit more. And I was always taught to be good, be brief, and be gone. I can promise to be two of the three. I'll let you all decide which of the two that is. But let me just pull, hopefully you guys are able to see this. And if somebody can, April, are you able to
I
see
see
it?
it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So again, topic being your authentic self. My name is Colin Diaz. And I wanted to start with a quote because this is something that has resonated with me. It's from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and his quote is, "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." And that really stands out to me because particularly today, when you look at social media, you look at family, friends, job structures that are really looking at us to be to fit particular molds, it's very easy for us to kind of lose yourself in those identities and to, I guess, align wholeheartedly with some of those constructs. And I can tell you just from my experience of, around 20 plus years in the workforce, the jobs that I've had where I have lost lots of myself to fit a certain mold have been the ones that I've been the most miserable at. I've been the most stressed. Really has just been bad environments. And so if you get nothing else from what I talk about today, it's, remain true to your authentic self. Even if that means that the job that you're in or you're going for is not the right fit, and that may happen as well. So quick introduction, I'm a College 9 grad, 2003. I was a film and digital media and legal studies major, mainly because I was pretty indecisive in undergrad. I came in wanting to be a Foley artist and do kind of all the sound effects for film. But I was really deeply interested in the interaction and experiences of different individual groups as it relates to the law and legal studies. And so I ended up on two very different paths. When I finished undergrad, I went and pursued an MFA in film studies from Chapman. Still wanted to do Foley art until if you're down in the LA area, in the early 2000s, everybody and their friends were involved in film or television, or at least thought they were. And I just wasn't a big fan at the time of paying my dues. So I ended up doing an MBA JD program at Duke University in sports, entertainment, and business management. And so you may wonder where my last name comes from. My dad and his entire side of the family is from the island of Roatan off the coast of Honduras. And my mom, or my birth mom, is African American. I've been married for 10 years and have two daughters. I'm only sharing this because it gives kind of context to some of the experience that I've had. But while I was at UC Santa Cruz, I was the chancellor's undergraduate intern and led the Moja program as well as Destination Higher Education. Co-chair 1 year for the African Black Student Alliance. I was part of the African American Theater Arts Troupe, and even played 1 year of basketball at the university and was part of Centro Americanos Unidos. Professionally, 20 years of experience spanning different industries. Why that matters is, I'm going to get to this, and this is kind of just a few photos of different events and advocacy that I do in my current role now. But Shante mentioned earlier about code switching and a lot of other things that folks and I have dealt with in my career, particularly when I walk into certain circles. Some of my members are in different communities, different backgrounds, different income levels, and others are and varied. And I found myself early in my career really struggling to be my authentic self in each of those. But I can say over the last few years, what really helped me with that was drawing on personal branding. So hopefully all of you have heard of this or have thought about it or are working on your personal brand, but I'm going to share some numbers of why personal branding is important. And this is based off of 3 different studies, but really polling recruiters from around the country. So the first is 95% of recruiters think that the job market's going to be competitive. This is even after the pandemic. So I know that you hear stories of, people difficulty getting back to work, but at the end of the day, job seekers still want to see people that stand out. Secondly, 90% of recruiters say that they conduct online research. This is always a pretty interesting conversation point, and one that I tend to have with younger professionals is about their social media, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, I guess now TikTok and a few others. It's not that you need to hide portions of yourself. It's just more about being cognizant of what you're sharing publicly, because recruiters, are looking at that, and that will impact your personal brand. And then lastly, 78% of recruiters say that the best qualified candidates they find through referrals. I can go into a whole long conversation about the hidden job market and how about 55% of positions that get filled never get flown publicly, because it's usually through referral or through contacts from another executive or employee. But I will state this. So there's generally 5 areas of focus in your personal brand. There's your backstory. So that's the kind of who, how, and where you got to where you are today. And it's important to know that. Obviously, you know it, you've lived it, but in a summation, if somebody were to ask about you, to kind of know your backstory high level. And then parables, we can look, and we've probably been inundated with statistics forever about, this is good, this is bad, this is what you need to do more of, this is what you need to do less of. But at the end of the day, the stories is really what tells. And you'll hear from a couple of examples and stories that I have in a few minutes. Third are flaws. And this is one, particularly if you're either looking to expand in your career or you're starting out and you're looking for a job, this is a really vulnerable place to share flaws that you may have. And, just depending on who you speak to, some people will say, champion your strengths, mask your flaws. I'm a little bit flipped on that. I think, it doesn't hurt to talk about your flaws if you're doing so in a way that can actually benefit you. I wouldn't sit at an interview or looking to advance and just sit there with a list of 15 flaws and 1 positive. That's probably not going to work out great for you. But definitely, as it relates to being authentic, you do need to acknowledge and embrace areas of opportunity. Fourth, being opinionated, and this is not necessarily what you may think it is in terms of I have an opinion about everything and I'm going to voice it and you're going to hear it and that's what's going to be. This is more about standing for something. So realizing what your bedrock stance is in particular areas, and being okay if you need to step away or you need to be boisterous in making sure others around you hear that. And this last piece, this has probably been the strongest one for me, about the reflection statement. So there's a couple people on here I won't name that I speak to fairly regularly, and I have an idea of what my personal brand is. I go to professionals in my field and I talk to them. I know what they would say. But if you can go back to family, friends, colleagues, maybe even people that don't love you or don't like you, and have that conversation about what they'd say about your personal brand. And I know this is an extremely vulnerable place to be, to find out, if you gave my top 5 qualities, what would you say they are? You might be surprised at certain areas that you don't see as strengths that others do, or vice versa, areas that you think you're doing really well in that maybe are areas of growth for you. But ultimately, why do any of these matter? The more that you develop and grow these 5 areas, the stronger your personal brand becomes. And it's easy to see it, easy to experience it, easy for others to come around. So real quick, on your screen, there's a question that I want to ask you, and I'm going to tweak it a little bit. But the question says, does behaving authentically as opposed to catering to others' expectations and interests during first encounters, so like an interview, pay off in terms of performance? I'm going to tweak that a little bit and ask you in the chat to just give either, you can do a thumbs up, thumbs down, yes or no. Have you ever found yourself professionally or even in class not being fully authentic, or you felt after that situation, I really wish I would have gone about this differently? So if you can take 10, 15 seconds and just type, yes, I have. You don't need to give the full details of the experience, but yes, I've experienced that. No, I have not. Be curious to see where everyone is at on that. I'm gonna give another few seconds and then we'll keep moving. Yep. Seen a lot of folks are, resonate with that. We've all been there, whether we like to admit it or not. Somebody said it earlier about choosing authenticity, being different. It's critically important. And this is a lesson that I learned. I'm gonna start with another statistic and then a lesson. So 61% of employees that were polled by Deloitte say they block at least one dimension of themselves at work. I would argue there's been many times I've blocked more than that, but I'm gonna kind of share the 4 main types of blocking or covering that people do. And I'm gonna share with examples. So for those of you that know me really well, this is 9 pictures of my wife. I spoke with her earlier to get permission because she was not a fan initially when I told her I was going to use her in my presentation. But this is the first form, and it has to do with appearance-based. So my wife works for a Fortune 100 company. Actually, they're one of the top 10 in the country. And now she's 100% remote and has been for the last 2 years. But when she first started, it was a corporate job, and she was in the office. And what she struggled with was how she was going to wear her hair, because it's protective hairstyles specifically for African American women that helps with the health of their hair. But oftentimes they may be viewed as not being professional. They may be viewed as being too ethnic, which is stuff that she's heard before. And so this is kind of a great example of something that my wife, I just thought, because she had shared this of all 9 different styles, it's something that a lot of women particularly struggle with, but also other people do as well. Second type is affiliation based. Many of you may recognize this Olympian here. This is Allison Felix. She is now an 11-time Olympic medalist, the most decorated Olympic athlete or track athlete in US history. But 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, this beautiful girl that you see her holding was born, and Nike was somebody that she's had as a contract for a very long time, where she's been contracted with them. Well, they had a maternity clause that basically significantly reduced the amount of money that she was going to be able to make during her pregnancy and even through initial postpartum. And so obviously she wasn't thrilled with that. She left the company, which was a pretty big loss for Nike, started her own shoe company, which she actually ran with and won 2 Olympic medals. But this resulted in Nike changing their policy. And the reason I share that is, how many times have we been in a scenario where, because of our affiliation, we end up masking it? She chose not to. She's obviously, she would be the first to tell you that if it was her first go around and maybe it was her first Olympics and she was just getting started, she might not have done the same thing, but she's very comfortable where she's at. She's had a lot of life experience, and that was what she did there. Third kind, this is something that this situation usually happens because of a lack of trust or something being new. So when you're in an interview, this could be one of the areas, and it's advocacy based. So you don't fight for something that you believe in. Maybe it's spiritual, maybe it's emotional, maybe it is ethical or moral, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just something where you feel the way of doing it should be this, but you don't speak up about it because of fear that you're going to be judged or there'll be assumptions made. And then the fourth kind, for those that know me, I am the one on the left. My brother Chris, who's 18 months older than me, is the one on the right. He also went to UC Santa Cruz. And if you saw the first slide that I shared and kind of how active I was on campus, I knew a lot of people on campus, or a lot of people knew me. And yet I'd argue under 10% knew that I had a brother. Part of that reason is, as an adult, he was diagnosed with on the spectrum, but essentially Asperger's autism. So high functioning, did really well in school, but emotionally very awkward. And so he and I were kind of like ships passing in the night. We would connect on campus here and there, but I didn't really do a lot to introduce him to folks, and he didn't either way. And a lot of that was because of just the, it's essentially where you deny people or items that represent you as to not be judged. And I don't necessarily, now looking back on it, regret it. I don't think I would necessarily handle it the same way, but it was a way that I was able to navigate not having to explain to everybody why he could care less what you had to say about certain things, or why he and I were different. But it was something that I definitely look at now. Our relationship is much different as adults, but that's a fourth way. And so I'm just going to round it out with this. If I gave a call to action to everyone here today, it would be to build or rebuild your personal brands. So really get down to the crux of what is part of your personal brand, what you stand for. It's okay to have a personal brand today that you don't want to have for tomorrow. There are definitely times where people would say certain things about me, and that was my personal brand, that I realized I needed to work on, changing certain aspects or identifying or acknowledging it. Second, I would say to pursue, so identify the right path for you in your career. That may be different than where you're headed right now. If you would have asked me 20 some odd years ago, would I be where I'm at today? The answer would have been a resounding no. For one, I didn't know what a chamber of commerce was. I didn't know specifically what it was that I wanted to do. I knew what others wanted me to do. And so that kind of leads into the third. Stand in being authentically you, even if you cover parts in your professional environment. Shante mentioned this earlier. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is important to identify what those areas are, what covering that means. Is it something that you're okay with? Is it something that maybe you're not, and you need to build into the confidence there? So just because it's a job or career you pursue, it does not mean that the company is a fit. Culture matters, don't settle. I can't reemphasize that last part about how much culture matters. I have been in some high-paying, horrendous jobs in terms of culture, and I've been miserable most days of it. I've been in other positions where the pay has not been as great, but as a total, total compensation, as I call it, great culture, great team, really build me up and have helped professionally. And then I'll end it with this. This is a quote from Sherry Fink. Being your authentic self is the ultimate secret to happiness in life. I will also add to that it's a moving target. So what is, authentic for you today may change tomorrow, and that's okay. I have, like I said, 2 daughters and a beautiful wife. And so my priorities have changed significantly than where they were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago. That's perfectly fine, but you want to work into building that authenticity. So with that, I will turn it back over to April, but I'd be more than happy to answer any questions either now or when we break out into the individual breakout rooms.
Thanks so much, Colin. I love those 5 areas of focus for your personal brand. I haven't heard it put that way before. So that was definitely an added value that I learned today. So does anyone have questions for Colin? Feel free either to put them in the chat or raise your hand. And I have one in the meantime as people are pondering. What's the best way to remain true to my values when others try to influence me otherwise in the workplace?
Ooh, that's the $1 million question. I don't know if I have like the crystal ball answer, because I think I would have answered this differently at different points. I'm at a point now where, I talk to my wife regularly where I'm very comfortable with what I believe in, what I stand for. And we've had the conversation that I may come home early one day and it's because, this was the line that was crossed and I wasn't willing to compromise myself. And so now I need to find another job. I understand if you're earlier in your career or you're in a different situation that you may not have that luxury. And I wouldn't even call it a luxury now because California is expensive. But I do think you need to have kind of those baselines for, there's some things where I might be able to compromise where, April, you feel strongly this way that is influencing me, and maybe I have a different interaction with you. So I'm working with you as much as I need to, but I don't need to engage on a deeper level. In some other scenarios, maybe it's a boss or a direct supervisor. You kind of have to look internal to see if it's something that is going to compromise you in terms of your well-being, your mental health, that type of wellness. Then you may need to walk away. You may need to, find something else. I will tell you, I have left jobs. I didn't quit the job. I looked for something else before I left. But the reason behind that was really what you just kind of highlighted, that there was something that was pushing me into a place that I just really wasn't comfortable in, or I felt like I was compromising myself to be there.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like part of it is knowing what your boundaries are and being able to communicate boundaries and maintain boundaries.
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, communicating the boundaries is something that I still struggle with in some ways. It's not so much um, tied to race, ethnicity, age as it was when I first started my career. Now it's boundaries of you have me for this amount of time in the day, and then that issue's got to wait till tomorrow. I've got a family, I have kids, and that's something that I still struggle with. But communication is huge. As much as you can. I'm gonna be 100% plugged in, but this is where these are the kind of parameters to that involvement or that engagement.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a question for all of us panelists. How should people avoid becoming complacent in their current careers? Do you want to shoot for that, Colin or Shantae or Armando?
I can. I also didn't want to monopolize, so I'm fine if either one of them want to start with the answer. I'll be taking notes as well.
It's a good question. And honestly, like I've been in higher ed for so long, I don't know if I even know what that would mean because higher ed is constantly changing. I'm working with, some of the best and brightest young minds, and y'all keep me on my toes. I will say that. I think going back again to my value set, like complacency is just not where I've ever been comfortable. I think there are too many issues and challenges that white supremacy continues to work against that won't allow me to just sit and be and accept where we are. Status quo is not something that I've been comfortable with. I think that it's abhorrent in a lot of ways, the ways in which I see some of our I'll be honest, some senior administration and folks at different universities, how they're really comfortable with advances that we've made when we look at disaggregating. Again, I'm coming from the higher ed context. When they look at disaggregating where we are as far as matriculation rates and graduation rates, and until we can completely remove academic achievement gaps, particularly within higher ed, I can't be complacent. So I didn't really answer the question, but I just don't. That's just not part of who I am as an individual. And I think there's so much work to be done. And we can do it across multiple industries and levels, but I would hope that folks would want to continue to improve and leave this place in better shape than where we found it. And that's really kind of how I continue to move through the work. So I don't know how not to do it. I just know that try not to do it because again, there's so many wrongs that need to be made right in the world.
I would piggyback off of what you said because I agree 100%. There's kind of two slogans or mottos that I've always lived by. And about 30 years ago, I got to hear Lou Holtz, who used to coach at Notre Dame, gave us long speech. But the thing that stood out from it was his kind of comment on focus on win, which has been an email address I've used for the last 20 some odd years. But it stands for focus on what's important now. And I think for my response to that is like, stuff is constantly changing, constantly moving. So if you're in the same place, then you technically, complacency to me leads to regression because everything around us is changing. But I really think that North Star, whatever your why is, not to sound cliche, but whatever gets you out of bed to do what you do. And it's got to be more than a paycheck because you can get a paycheck pretty much anywhere. That will keep you from being complacent. And I can't emphasize enough what Shantae said about the achievement gaps. I mean, and the workforce. I didn't share this earlier, but there are over 4,000 chambers of commerce in the U.S. and I represent under 4% of leaders that are Black, male, female, and that's something that is problematic because if you look at just business across the U.S., there are more than 4% of businesses that are people of color, and I mean it's not just the African Black community, but just as long as those things exist, there's an area to continue to build towards.
Particularly when we juxtapose it to our carceral environment, it just the numbers don't lie.
Yeah. Thank you so much for both of those insights. And I want to have us keep enough time for our small groups. So I think Patrick or Matt will introduce the breakout rooms next.
Yes, so we'll be breaking into breakout sessions here, and my colleague Matt is setting up the groups by our presenters' names. So you'll be able to go in and click on the breakout rooms button in the bottom right corner on your toolbar, and you'll be able to select your presenter. So if I wanted to be, if I wanted to be an April Lee's group, I would go down to the bottom of that list and I would see April Lee's name, and I would see join on the right side, and I would click join, and that'll put me into that group. And as a reminder to our presenters, you do need to hit that join button to enter your breakout session as well. And if you're not seeing the breakout button in the bottom right corner, please stay in here, and Matt and I will help you get into the group that you want to be in. You can do that now.
I think there were some really great conversations during the breakouts. And I think, in our space, like something that I wanted to maybe just share here as well in the larger group is that I used to be scared to like raise my hand, share my voice, share my opinion, perspective, because I didn't think it would be validated or valid. And now it's like, I remind myself that I'm here because I add value and perspective that comes from being who I am, because no one is exactly like me. And I have valuable knowledge and experience about things that others don't have in exactly the same way that I do. And that's how I contribute and add value and remind myself to be authentic. What about you, Shante?
So we were just about to get into this great conversation, and then we got pulled back into the larger. So Julie had asked a question on how you use your voice, particularly to a supervisor, and how you kind of name, your needs and your desires. And I was just saying, I think it's important to speak to not necessarily the essence of the individual, but what works for them, what resonates with them, and then use that as an opportunity to kind of meld in kind of what your needs are. Your needs aren't conforming to them, but understanding, particularly if they're a data person, show them the data. If my needs are to work a 4-10, 4 days, 10 hours, show the data that supports like this is actually really helping, the work environment. This is going to be beneficial for not only me as an individual, but for the staff. If data isn't, their jam, then really think through other things that are going to benefit and be advantageous, thinking about like interest convergence. How is it going to help them and you? And again, that's a larger conversation for a bigger day, and we can talk more about that and kind of theorize about it. But I think, again, finding that sensibility within that individual so that there can be some parity, some compromise, and a way for an individual to maybe feel like they're winning also.
Got it. Armando, is there a headline that you'd like to share from your breakout room?
Currently on start date.
Well, let's see here. Let me get recentered here. Well, I would say that trying to think. I didn't exactly have as full of a meeting as I would have liked to. So some of the things I went over was kind of like the idea of, like I said in the previous thing, what kind of compromises you need to make in the workplace to work with a disability and be amongst your peers in a way that doesn't lend yourself to having to feel less than or trying to prove oneself and that kind of thing, where it's we talked about complacency, for example, how complacency is like the shortest path to being a sycophant, basically. And if one is a sycophant, they're not as poised to be authentic to oneself. And I think today's overall meetings went really well.
Thank you. Colin, was there a headline for you that stood out?
Yeah, actually, right towards the end, similar to Shante, we had a good conversation, but one of the things that came up was about kind of the personal branding and what is the bedrock for that passion. And so what we're going over, I do think passion is an important piece to kind of your personal branding, but I also think that it's fleeting. So, grounding it in what is your what are your values? What what are kind of the unshakable, non-negotiable values, and starting with that as a base point, and then building into kind of building your authentic self and your personal branding.
So good. Well, we're at the end of our time for today. That went by really fast. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. A huge thank you to the speakers, Shantae, Armando, and Colin, for taking time out of their work days to share their insights on how to be our authentic selves. And I just want to talk about a couple things coming up next. The next session in the series is To Grad School or Not, and that's on Wednesday, August 25th, 12 to 1 p.m. Pacific, when alumni Lakia Cherry and Brian Turner will explore different paths after undergrad, including grad school, the workforce, or both. So we hope to see you there. Thanks, everyone. It was so good. Thank you for joining. See you next time.